The business, motherfucker.
The Daily Read. Your source for news, politics, sports, and all things trending. Here's your host, Marcus Gentry.
But let's begin with that breaking news involving New York Congressman George Santos, who is in custody right now. And we've just learned he's facing those 13 federal counts.
10 questions resting on the question of whether she had been raped by Mr. Trump. Also questions of whether he had defamed her on the battery charge. And that gets to, again, the accusation of rape. Question one, did Mr. Trump rape Miss Carroll? The jury voted no. On the question of did Mr. Trump sexually abused Ms. Carroll? Yes, the jury said. Moving down to question four, Ms. Carroll was injured as a result of Mr. Trump's conduct. The jury said yes.
Let's go back to Ryan. There's a verdict.
Yes, on the top charge of seditious conspiracy, at least 4 of the defendants have been found guilty. That is Ethan Nordine, Joseph Biggs, Zachary Reel, and Enrique Tarrio, which is actually kind of the one I was frankly wondering if they were going to be able to get him on. Dominic Pizzola, I think we're still waiting on that to find out whether or not what the jury found there.
Welcome to the Daily Read, and I am your host, Marcus Gentry. Today we're going to talk about HIV and AIDS. And I had a safety meeting that I had to go to a few days back. And what made me want to talk about this subject is one of our speakers that was talking to us about safety on our trucks and things of that nature. She had explained that she had AIDS after she got through telling her story and who she was. And it shocked a lot of people in the room. She explained she got it from her husband, and, unfortunately, their daughter doesn't have it because of the advancement in HIV and AIDS drugs that has taken place over the years. And I thought this would be an interesting story to talk about once I heard her story. This is some real fascinating stuff. We haven't heard about AIDS and HIV in a long time. And the reason why is because there's so few people in America that has it now. You're talking about 1.2 million people. And it sounds like a lot of people, but America has almost 2 billion people in this country. So I think it's 1.5 billion people in this country. So 1 million people having HIV or AIDS is not a lot of people. That's almost like 1 or 2 people in your small town that has it, and when you go to a big city like Detroit, maybe 1,000 people have it. That's not a lot of people. And the drugs that they're using now, they're trying to work on a cure still, but the drugs is isolating the HIV virus to the point where you can't give it to anybody else once you catch it. This is some fascinating stuff. But before we get into that, I want to talk about what I've been following in the news. The end of Title 42, which was the bill that was passed when Trump was in office, talking about the illegal immigrants and how they wasn't accepting anybody in. It ended a couple of nights ago, and the Republicans, full of all that doom and gloom, were saying that there was going to be a mad rush from the border by a lot of illegal immigrants. This is crazy, people. Immigration is one of the foundations of this country. I don't agree with what Kanye West said about slavery was a choice and all of that crap. But immigration is one of the foundations of this country. The problem is the type of immigrants that are coming here, white people don't want. Africans, Asians, Hispanics, they're flocking to this country. But the white people in their land, they're satisfied with where they live. If you're English and you live in Finland, England, Ireland, them people ain't trying to come here. They good. They good at their home. Next thing in the news that I think it bears the close watch, because he just had a town hall meeting. Trump loses his defamation case against E. Jean Carroll. Good for her. Any man that rapes a woman should be locked up or killed. Period. I've got into it with women before, but I've never ever thought about doing no stuff like that. That's crazy. I think she won a $5 million. She didn't even go into the suit asking for money. She left it up to the jury to decide what kind of monetary funds she should receive. And like I said, he did a town hall meeting with CNN, and he defamed her again. So she's thinking about suing him again. The Proud Boys lose their case for insurrection. I knew this was coming because they're slowly dismantling the MAGA movement. Okay? They're going after the leader. This is how the government works when they dismantle an organization. They go after the leader secretly. They start locking up all the pawns, the ones that go out here and move something, do something, shake something. The Proud Boys. Then they start going after the leadership over the Proud Boys that might not necessarily get out here with no guns, but they're conducting everything. And then they're going to take down Trump. So that's another case to watch for. The Proud Boys, they lose their case, but I think they got some other stuff going on too. This is for my Tennessee people. There's a Tennessee company called ARC. I know where this place is also. They refuse to recall 67 million potentially dangerous airbag filters. Okay, this for my people in Tennessee now. Those 67 million airbags are not necessarily just going to be dished out in Tennessee. They're going to be all over the country. But the fact that this is a Tennessee company, you know, it's going to be some backlash behind it. That's something you guys need to watch for, because a lot of these Tennessee companies are plugged in with the with the legislature and the politicians and stuff like that. So it'll be surprising who this company has given financial backing to where they can stand up and say they're not recalling 67 million potentially dangerous airbags. These airbags could kill somebody if they're deployed, without an accident. Also, the senator, the congressman, the one who lied on his resume, he was turned over to the feds. He's facing 13 counts. Let me get his name real quick. Santos, that's his last name, Santos, Representative Santos. He is facing 13 counts of fraud. Now, this is important for us as far as liberals go, because that's a seat that's open. But there's a trick to this, people. You see, the House Speaker, he doesn't have to kick him out. If he's a Republican who's willing to sign any bills for the Republicans, he don't have to kick him out of Congress. Everybody's going to pressure him to do so. But these are some slick, evil people. Even though that man gets charged, those charges might not give him any jail time. And I think you can still serve as a congressman if you have no more than 2 years. I'm pretty sure that's what I read. You can serve up anywhere from probation to 2 years if you're already a congressman. It's up for the Congress to kick you out once you get that time. If you don't get no time, or you get less than 2 years, they don't have to kick you out. Okay, so just keep that in mind. This is a potential seat that can come open to give us more leverage in Congress. Let's get back to this story I was talking about with one of our trainers who was talking about following distance and things of that nature. And then she shocked everybody by telling us that she was HIV positive. And I mean, it was a fascinating story. You know, she thinks that her husband cheated and they reconciled and they both have it, and their daughter doesn't. Now, like I said, later on in the show, we're going to get through the history of HIV, because I didn't know, when I was looking up the history of HIV and AIDS, I didn't know that AIDS really started in the 1920s. Okay? It started in the 1920s. We didn't really hear about it until the 80s because it didn't jump species. And we're going to talk about jumping species later on also, after we get back off this this break. But AIDS has been around for a long time. It's a form of some type of a variant of a flu, some type of virus that's basically undetectable when it comes to filtering blood. Like when you get blood transfusions and stuff like that, those blood transfusions, they filter out a lot of negative things in people's blood when they donate blood. But viruses, this is why a lot of people was catching AIDS too. Not just because they were homosexual or because they were cheating or anything like that. They can have a car accident and go into the hospital and receive bad blood. So they had to start checking for that. But we're going to go into more detail about this when we get back off this break.
The business, motherfucker.
The Daily Read.
The business, motherfucker.
The Daily Read.
It's the year 1920. A stranger walks through the streets of Kinshasa in the Democratic Republic of Congo. He's astonished how his city has developed. Many laborers moved here from surrounding villages. Although it seemed like a normal day for him, he will change the history of humankind forever. The stranger was preparing for work. He worked as a butcher for a local market. But this isn't your typical butcher. He is processing bushmeat. At some point on this day, he was injured and got a deep cut. He probably didn't know about the significance.
I'm gonna stop that right there. Bushmeat in Africa and China and certain parts of Russia, everywhere else, people stick to the basics: beef, chicken, fish, you know, stuff like that. But there are countries on this planet that still eat shark meat, monkey meat. You'll pull up in some of these markets in some of these third world countries, and they got dogs that they've skinned and chopped them up for meat, because there's so many people in these populated areas in some of these third world countries that they have to eat certain things in order to stay alive. You know, beef, like it's certain countries that you can't kill a cow. A cow is considered sacred. You know, we'll chop up a cow and eat hamburgers in a minute. But there are certain countries that can't eat cow. But there's only so much chicken that they can eat before they start dealing with eel and all kinds of other stuff. So I just wanted to stop there right there when he said bush meat. You know, that's what he's referring to, certain type of animals that some of these countries will eat that's outside the norm of us United States citizens.
has become a global epidemic starting in the 1980s. To this date, over 36 million people have died of AIDS. But where does HIV come from and how did it evolve? My name is Gwen Steinek and today we'll talk about the origins and the evolution of HIV. Just as a disclaimer, this is the fourth part of our HIV video series. We already talked about possible HIV vaccines, how 2 people were cured, and how many more might be cured in the future. So with that, let's start. HIV, or the human deficiency virus, infects humans and causes AIDS. It is estimated that over 36 million people have died of AIDS so far and that over 38 million are infected right now.
36 million have died, 38 are infected. That's worldwide. Okay? Here in America, out of that 38 million, there's only 1 million and I think 1.2 million in America alone. So we have been keeping an eye on it secretly, and we've been dealing with it. We've been dealing with it so much to the point where people don't even talk about it no more.
And this epidemic started in the 20th century. There are several theories when HIV first infected humans, but we know one thing: HIV is older than you might think. HIV-1, the dominant form of HIV today, was probably formed in the 1920s in Kinshasa. In this region, the simian immunodeficiency virus, or SIV, can be found in apes. Since this virus is very similar to HIV, it is very likely that it was transmitted from an ape to a human. This phenomenon is called zoonosis, and it means that a virus can jump from one species to another. This actually didn't happen once, but scientists...
Now, we remember now, we had that bird flu that was going around. It was killing birds at first, and it jumped species. Okay, zoonosis. I didn't know that until I read this also. So zoonosis, I used because it's called a jumping species. You know, we all seen the movies and things of that nature and read the books about viruses that can jump from animals. It only kills animals, but some unsuspecting person eats that animal and gets sick and start passing the sickness along to other people. So, you know, when you talking about jumping species, that's what that is.
Scientists now know that it happened at least 12 different times, but only one time the dominant form of HIV was created. Unfortunately, Kinshasa was the perfect breeding ground for HIV at the time. The city expanded and more people lived close together. Kinshasa also had comparatively many prostitutes, as a lot of workers moved there at the time. Moreover, unsterilized needles were used in health clinics, making the transmission of HIV even easier. Over the next years, HIV started to spread to other countries. In the 1930s, a series of newborn babies died from mysterious infections in Germany. The peculiar thing was that all the newborn babies seemed to be healthy, but they had a defective immune system. Today we believe that they might have contracted HIV due to unsterilized needles in the hospital. In 1969, a 16-year-old African-American boy died from Kaposi sarcoma. Kaposi sarcoma is a form of cancer which is rare and is often caused by HIV infections. In 1976, a Norwegian sailor, his wife and his daughter died of unusual infections. This family also had a defective immune system. And then in the 1970s, more and more drug addicts started to die in the United States. Then HIV infiltrated gay communities in large US cities. In 1981, unusual clusters of pneumonia were reported in 5 homosexual men in Los Angeles. These men have...
As you can see the timeline starting from the 20s, and I know some people are amazed at how they can track this stuff back, because like I said, us normal people who aren't scientists or academia, we look at it as starting in the bathhouses in California. Okay, the bathhouse. Everybody know about the bathhouses. They where the homosexuals meet up. Now, that's where we can track it from. But anytime somebody dies mysteriously around the world, the CDC is on top of that. They record it. They take samples of the blood, they take samples of the virus, and they store it in coolers and cryogenic stasis and stuff like that. So they was able to track this stuff back. Once people started dying in mass, they started tracking it back to the first victim, which was the guy in Africa in the 1920s. Now remember, he was a butcher who was eating, you know, unusual meats that we don't eat. This is some fascinating stuff.
That's how HIV originated in a nutshell. Now I want to address some common HIV concerns, since there is apparently a big Wikipedia article about this. So let's start. Number 1. HIV doesn't exist.
Just because we don't talk about it anymore, people, it is a common myth out here that AIDS is gone, especially amongst the youngsters out here, the people that's in the clubs and the head nodders, the head bangers. It's still out here. But these are some of the myths that he's saying that people believe in.
Number 2. HIV doesn't cause AIDS. There was a professor in Berkeley who famously said in 1987 that HIV doesn't cause AIDS. This guy had quite a lot of followers, and one of these followers actually took a needle, an infected needle with HIV, and he injected it into his arm. He wanted to prove that he will not die of AIDS, and he actually did, since he died from a heart attack a year later.
Now, remember, this is an age of fake news, okay? And this age of fake news that we live in, people will believe anything or doubt anything. And it's crazy. Like he just said, you got people out here who will straight up say AIDS is not real, it's made up by the government. You got other people who saying HIV doesn't cause AIDS. And you know, this stuff is traceable. Just because we're not educated scholars in the medical field does not mean that HIV and AIDS does not exist, or you can't catch it, or it's not real. We just came out of a pandemic. Okay, we just came out of a pandemic. And you got people who believe this pandemic that we was in was caused by some kind of government conspiracy to kill off people. You know, it's almost craziness. But like I say, this is the age we living in, where it's a popularity thing. If you popular, or if you're in the in crowd, people will believe your story. People will believe whatever you tell them. If you're not, which a lot of scientists are not, because there's a big push against academic people. I'm going to talk about this on another show, of how Rome fell, the fall of Rome, because everything is running parallel to when Rome fell. When Rome fell at the time, there was mass homosexuality throughout Rome. They found aborted babies in some of the bathhouses, the skeletons of aborted babies, and some of the scientists believe that these fetuses, the women at that time who didn't want the child, would come to these bathhouses and just have the baby inside of a hole and drop it down in there. And that was how they got rid of babies. That's how they aborted babies. There's a lot of parallels that runs parallel to what we are going through here in America, to what Rome went through before the fall of Rome. There's a big push against education. You got people who are trying to get rid of books out of the library because they don't want true history about slavery to be found out by the younger generation. You have the worshiping of Confederate statues. These people lost the Confederate War. They shouldn't even have a statue. And if they got a statue, put it in a museum somewhere. You know, we shouldn't have to see that every day. It's a lot of things that's going on that runs parallel to what happened when Rome fell. But when we get back, we're going to talk about the other side of HIV and how a person like Magic Johnson and his wife can live. I don't think his wife has AIDS, but how people like him can live so long with HIV and not die from it, because they have made medical advances, just like the woman that did the safety training. They have made medical advances to keep people from catching this stuff. We'll talk about that when we get back.
The business, motherfucker.
The Daily Read.
The business, motherfucker.
The Daily Read.
Researchers say a fifth person has been cured of HIV after a high-risk stem cell transplant. The findings were published in the journal Nature after a 53-year-old man in Germany showed no detectable virus in his body after stopping his HIV medications for more than 4 years. It's worth noting that this patient joins a small group of people who have been said to be cured of HIV under extreme circumstances. ABC News medical contributor and emergency medicine physician Dr.
I'm going to stop there right there. Like I was saying earlier, they are working hard on a cure for AIDS, and they got a formula that can cure it. Okay? Only 5 people in the world, 5, have been cured from AIDS, and they looked up on this formula. It was a splash of chemotherapy and stem cell surgery that helped the patient cure himself of AIDS. So they looked up on the formula. I read articles in USA magazine, US News, Newsweek magazine. I read an article in there where they was talking about how a scientist in Africa found the cure for AIDS in the saliva of a cow. And this is a real article that I read, and I was wondering why more people haven't caught on to that. Well, come to find out that that whole article, it was surrounded by the whole stem cell thing. You see, the whole time stem cell is coming back into this, because how can I put it? They're thinking that the cure came from the saliva of a cow, but the man who was cured, he had recently a stem cell replacement. And what happens when they replace your stem cells, you have to go through chemo to flush out the bad blood, the bad stuff that's in your blood, and it takes away the AIDS with it. The problem with that is it's highly dangerous. You can die from it. You know, they don't want to kill you to cure you. You know, they don't want the cure to be as worse as what you're living with, because they can stop you from dying from it until they find a cure that won't kill you. So that was that article I read, it was a bogus article, but it was based in fact. Let's get back to it.
Dr. Darian Sutton joins me now to discuss this. Dr. Sutton, good to see you. So HIV.gov says more than 38 million people in 2021 globally are living with HIV. Of that, 38 million, 1.2 million in the U.S., are living with the virus. Walk us through how this patient was apparently...
I'm going to stop there right there before we get to the cure, or the guy that was cured. 1.2 million people, like I said at the beginning of this program, is not a lot of people. That's the reason why you don't hear more about AIDS anymore, because 1.2 million people can be 2 to 3 people in a small town, in small town America, might have AIDS. And when it comes to a big city like Detroit, 1,000 people, which is not a lot of people. Chicago, maybe 2,000 people might have AIDS, not a lot of people. And then when you combine all of those numbers together, it comes out to that 1.2 million. Like I said, America has almost 1.5 billion people in this country. So 1.2 million is still a lot of people that has that virus. But it's at a level to the point where no one's talking about it anymore. Let's continue on.
Cured of HIV.
Good afternoon, Alexis. This is another remarkable breakthrough that adds to the years and decades, of research that have been done to find a cure for HIV. In this particular case, this was a 53-year-old male who had been previously diagnosed with HIV. In 2011, he was unfortunately diagnosed with leukemia, for which he was given chemotherapy and a stem cell transplant. Now, what's important about this case is that his stem cell transplant came from a donor who was naturally resistant against HIV. Many may not know, but there's a small percentage of the population that don't have the receptors needed for HIV to bind.
This is going to sound like some science fiction stuff here, people. But that's where the cure is going to come from. Like he just said, they have people out here who are immune to AIDS. They can't get AIDS. Okay? They just can't get it because their bodies doesn't have the receptors to allow the virus to take hold of them. So this man really literally lucked up, but he lucked up in a way that the world can benefit from it. My only thing is, you see it all the time in these sci-fi movies, how the government finds people who are immune to a virus and they kidnap them and lock them in cages and do experiments on them. You know, they did experiments on us as black people with syphilis. You know, so this stuff is not far-fetched. So any questions or concerns I would have about that is, what are they going to do with these people that they find who are immune to AIDS? I mean, this is a good way to get the cure, but are they going to harvest their stem cells? To harvest somebody's stem cells, you could kill them. You know, so this is going to be some stuff to look out for.
Cause infection. And after that transplant, this patient then began to develop new and healthy cells. And as you said, since 2018, he has not needed any HIV medication or treatment and has been continuously tested. And there have been no detectable signs of the HIV virus, which is this is what makes it a remarkable and a breakthrough.
Yeah, truly remarkable. But I know this treatment is not one that everyone with HIV can undergo, right? There are some risks and some limitations here.
Stem cell transplants are an incredibly risky procedure. Right now, they are only retained for those who absolutely need it with life-threatening conditions, for example, like leukemia. With stem cell transplants, patients do need chemotherapy to get rid of the dysfunctional and diseased cells, but that can cause significant immune suppression, which can make patients susceptible to life-threatening infections. There's also the risk that stem cell transplants can be rejected from patients, which can also be life-threatening. So hopefully,
like I said, the cure can be worse than the actual disease itself. So, you know, again, like I said, my thing is the people who are immune to AIDS, I'm almost certain that the government is tracking these people. They know who they are because you can test the blood, and you can believe blood has been tested all across the world to find out. Once they found out that there are people out here who are basically immune to AIDS, they know where these people are. And my thing is, you know, how are they harvesting the stem cells? You know, how are they now stem cells can come from the placenta of a baby also. Okay, aborted fetuses can have the aborted fetus, if they test the blood for the aborted fetus, they might be able to use that fetus for medical purposes, since the mother got rid of the child anyway. So these are a lot of questions and things that can come up when you're dealing with the morality of it. You know, are they going to take lives to save other lives? How are they going to do that? Let's get back to it.
So many resources available, thankfully. Two of the biggest ones are called PEP and PrEP. Can you break that down for us?
Absolutely. So thanks to modern medication, people with HIV can live long and healthy lives. And thanks to medication, those who consistently take it and are undetectable will not transfer it to their sexual partners. And like you said, we also have medications for prophylaxis or prevention. We call it PrEP, or pre-exposure prophylaxis. It's a medication that, if taken daily, can significantly reduce one's chances of getting infected with HIV. And we also have PEP, which is post-exposure prophylaxis. And that is for patients who may have a high-risk interaction that come into the emergency room, and that medication I can provide and prescribe that can substantially still reduce their risk.
Now, the reason I put this in here, PEP and PrEP, because the woman was telling us about how, you know, her significant other, you know, they had offered them both PEP and PrEP. What that is when you married to somebody who has AIDS, they're supposed to take their medication. But you can also take a medication called PrEP. And what that does is, if you know you finna be in a high-risk situation, okay, this is your husband or your wife that has it, and you don't want to leave that person that has it, you can take a medication along with them taking their medication to prevent you from catching it. I mean, it's science fiction at its best, but it's dangerous. I mean, who wants to go through that? This is some stuff right here, people. This is where love and wanting to be with that person that you married to forever, this is where that stuff comes into play at.
After the intervention that might have caused their exposure.
And when we talk about the medicines that allow people living with HIV to live a healthy life, there's something called undetectable equals untransmittable. Remind us what that means and why it's important.
Such an important thing to remember. It has been dedicated research has been done to understand this concept, and we now understand that those who have HIV, who consistently take their medication and are consistently undetectable, cannot transfer it to their sexual partners. Now that means that people who are healthy and living their well lives and taking their medications regularly cannot produce that risk for their sexual and intimate partners, and that is something that unfortunately is not well known, and I'm hopeful that more people will understand it to hopefully decrease the stigma associated with this diagnosis.
Dr. Darian Sutton, thank you.
Dr. Darian Sutton, one of the top researchers on AIDS and HIV. Like I was saying, people, I had to do a show on this because it was fascinating, you know, to hear her story and the way it affected the class, because, you know, it almost came out the blue. Like, everybody was looking around at each other when she said it, and I can tell she's used to being a public speaker, and she was okay, you know, and she dealt with it, and she's living her life. But I thought this would be a fascinating show to do and talk about it. I was going to do a show on something else, but like I said, when this story came up, I felt like we had to bring this back into the spotlight, because there's so few people that have it here in this country now that a lot of us forget that it's still out there. You know, just like COVID-19, we might not see bodies being piled up inside of storage trucks like when the virus first hit, but that doesn't mean people are not still dying from COVID-19. This world has always had pathogens. Okay, pathogens are what that's the doctor's term or the scientific term for diseases and stuff. pathogens have always existed on this planet. I'm pretty sure once the ice melts, as we go through this global warming phase, there are going to be more viruses and diseases that pop up. It's going to wipe out a lot of people. My thing is, the ones who don't go take the medications, the ones who don't go take the virus shots, that's your choice. And if you have kids, you have to make the choice for your kids. So your kids' choice is your choice. But modern medicine has advanced so much, we're not living in the Stone Age no more. And when I see people who are afraid to go down there and take the medication, when you can literally see body bags piling up outside of a hospital, it's your choice. But it's a scary thing, especially when you know the person, or when you know the people who, you know, like my mother. My mother refused to go for a long time. She refused to go get that shot. And I think my sister got sick with COVID. And when my sister got sick, it put her down. She didn't die, but it put her down bad. And I think that was the wake-up call for my mother to go down there and get that shot. Get the series of shots. And, you know, that's just for people's out there benefits. You know, we've advanced so much as a civilization that modern medicine is not something to be scared of. And I think a lot of people who are scared of modern medicine, most of the people that I've seen that scared of modern medicine are either deeply religious or conspiracy theorists, or, you know, they're just flat out scared. Hollywood plays a big part of that. Police brutality plays a big part of that. The way they do people when it comes to the authority figures, how they don't keep stuff straight up with you, plays a part in that. The fear that people have of going down there and taking that shot. You know, when you know you got a bird flu going around that's knocking people out and killing them. When you got you know, COVID-19 and AIDS and Ebola floating around killing people. So I hope you guys learned something from today's show. Look some of this stuff up. The medications, PEP and PrEP, stem cell research. Do your research on stem cells, because there was a big pushback a few years ago about stem cell research. Do your research about bush meat and the dangers of eating meat that's not certified through your government's USDA. It might not necessarily be our government, but some governments have accountability when it comes down to mass producing meat. Some countries don't even have that at all. And that's where you get into bush meat, rats and dog meat and stuff like that. So do your research on some of this stuff. I hope you guys learned something today. This is the Daily Read, and I'm out.
The business, motherfucker.
The Daily Read.
Business.